Well, good morning, GC family. So thankful to be here with you. I bet you did not know that Patrick Mahomes was going to be leading worship this morning. Nice of him to come over before the big game tonight. That's right. You know, he really does have a dad bod. Sorry, Rod, that was low. That was a Patrick Mahomes joke, not a Rod Brady joke. But anyway, we are glad that, our worship team does such an awesome job, don't they? Love that song, Refiner's Fire. And I think that's been the heart of our desire for this Good Life series that we've been going on now into week 5. If you're new with us today, I hope to catch you up just real fast. The Good Life is what we're calling Jesus' vision of the kingdom life that he gives us in what's known as the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew 5 through 7. It's Jesus' tour through here's what you can expect and here's how you can live as you follow me in the very present, real kingdom of Jesus under his rule and reign. And we're exploring right now the sections in chapter 5 about where Jesus shows us how to live out Scripture. And we started that last week, this section of 6 sayings with Jesus' connection that he makes with anger and with murder. But it's going to be great as we continue to walk through this morning. So I got a question for you. How good, is that me? Sorry, I don't have a beard. I shaved this morning. Sorry, guys. Okay. Hope I have your attention. How good are you at distinguishing in the world we live in between what is real and what is an imitation? Some of you are probably really good at this. You can take your favorite brand name snack and you know the difference when you get Great Value versus that, right? Or a lot of you probably this morning, because we are in Texas, know the exact difference between Dr. Pepper and Dr. Thunder, right? We can distinguish between those things pretty well. But in our ever-increasing world of AI and digital media, I want to ask you this. How good are you at distinguishing between what is a real image and what is fake? So here's a little quiz for you. Got some different pictures up on the screen. First, a portrait. See if you can figure out which one's real and which one's fake. Left or right? I'm sorry about that. I don't know what's causing that. Which one's real and which one's fake? Anybody want to guess? Left or right? It's the one on the right. It's fake. How about these landscapes? Which one's real and which one's fake? Yeah. It looks like the left. It's the right, right? Man, computers are doing an incredible job, right? You can't even really tell the difference. Those both are beautiful pictures. I would love to go on vacation in that fake area right there, right? I would love to go on vacation in that real area on the left. This next one, I'll tell you, it's already fake. I'm an Oklahoma State fan, and so I asked ChatGPT this week, will you give me an AI-generated photo of Oklahoma State winning the national championship in football? Now, you can tell this one is fake because it's awful. Look at this thing. First of all, Gundy's holding up a version of the Super Bowl trophy. He's got an extra hand behind his hand. Look at his fingers. The Oklahoma State logo is some flying bird. I don't know what is going on there. But anyway, we live in this world right now in which it's nearly impossible to say what is real and what's artificial. It's things like generative images, ChatGPT, AI that can now write an essay for you in a matter of seconds. We live in this constant inundation, not only of this fake artificial world, but also a world of misinformation, spin, and fake news that complicate our world in trying to distinguish what is true. We live in a world, a strange new world we'll call it, where the artificial is slowly replacing reality. Now, not only is this true in public life, what we see in the news and on social media, but this is ever increasingly true also in our inside world, including how we experience sex, sexuality, in the world around us, including intimacy. For years, and in recent church history, conventional wisdom has said this. It has said that the topic of sexuality is often off limits. Sure, have the talk at home, have the talk, the one talk, hopefully with your kids, but openly talk and share in community about sexuality? No way. It's too taboo. But I would say to us this morning that this conventional wisdom does not line up with biblical wisdom for a couple reasons. Jesus openly talks about sex. He, a single celibate rabbi, and the disciples that follow him who write the rest of the New Testament openly shared God's vision for sexuality, and we want to follow that lead. Second, why the conventional wisdom isn't always the best is that our silence as a church about issues that affect every one of us has been deafening. The world around us has talked, shared, twisted, and formed us to have a multitude of beliefs about sexuality, often apart from and separated from God's original intent. And we want to be, as a church at Grace Crossing, not reactive to the world, but proactive in our following of Jesus, to live the good life. And the good life has to deal with every part of our lives, including sexuality. So this morning, we're going to talk about sex. Good morning. We're going to do it with multiple generations in the room, not to try to offend anyone. We're going to be sensitive. So I begin with this disclaimer. I want you to know, with this disclaimer in mind, that as we talk about sex, first of all, this is a place without shame. Shame is the enemy's best weapon when it comes to these internal struggles, internal temptations, and internal sins. Shame will always tell you you are alone. At its worst, it will tell you you are horrible. And always it will tell you you cannot change. Today's teaching, while honest, is not about shame. If you're feeling shame, please know that that is not our prayer, our intent, our desire for anyone. Don't believe the whispers that will be spoken to you when we talk and when you share and when you think about these things and you hear Scripture. Don't believe the whispers that say you're the only one. You're bad. You cannot change. Don't allow those to speak louder than Jesus' words this morning. You want me to switch out? Okay. All right, I'm going to switch out there. Thank you. But let's not be people of shame. And the second is no shadow. This is a sensitive subject. It can be difficult to navigate. And today, it's the goal to be sensitive, but also be very real. And I don't want to gloss over, we're not going to gloss over. What we're going to do is shine a spotlight, shine a light on this topic, and not ignore the gravity of Jesus' words, but be honest, open, and embrace them as we've been transparent about them. First and foremost, let's remember, sex and sexuality are good. They're God-created. But when we give them life in the darkness, when we ignore the realities of our world, the confusion and the falsehoods, we get what we have today, what we call the fray of modern life. A fray is any area of your life that is unraveled, unmoored, or missing foundation. And we have a modern existence of sexual fray. Things that we believe about our sexuality that are unmoored and missing a foundation. Considering the following statistics of our world. The average age now in which a young person in America is exposed to pornography is 13. For boys, it's 11. The average age that kids are given a smartphone, which is basically an catalog of pornography, is age 11. 84% of males age 14 to 18 have viewed pornography. 57% of young girls 14 to 18 have viewed pornography. 54% of practicing Christians report porn use on a weekly or monthly basis. That comes from Barna Institute. 53% of boys and 39% of girls believe that pornography is a realistic depiction of sex. Remember what we just said about the artificial invading reality. Porn consumption in the United States now ranks as the second largest indicator of marriage crisis. I could go on more into statistics about use and back and forth and how much money is spent on the industry, but you get the point. It's the fray. It's this unconnected view of sexuality. And it's into this fray that Jesus still speaks these words across time. In the Sermon on the Mount, starting verse 27, he says, "You have heard that it was said, 'You shall not commit adultery.' But I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye causes you to stumble, gouge it out and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to stumble, cut it off and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one part of your body for your whole body to go into hell." Now, there's so much here that we could say. And this is really today as a teaching that starts, hopefully, a conversation for later. But I want you to notice, just as Jesus did last week in our teaching on anger and murder, Jesus is fulfilling the heart of God by displaying the true meaning of Scripture. Jesus, by saying, "You've heard that it was said, now I tell you," is giving us the full intent of God's law and purpose. Last week we discovered that while we all know that murder is wrong, in a very similar way, we all know that adultery is wrong. Very similar vein, they destroy, they break. Adultery breaks covenant. It destroys families and generations. This is pretty much a universal knowledge in the human experience. And now here, just as Jesus equated anger and insult to murder, Jesus equates the inner sin of lust with the outer act of adultery. But remember what he's doing. Jesus isn't just being a prude. What he's doing is showing us God's heartbeat, God's true desire for humanity. 6 examples he'll give us here in chapter 5 to take us near enough to the heart of God to say this is what it looks like to live the good life. A place in which Jesus says lust is not some innocuous exercise of the mind, but is actually something that takes you down a path of brokenness. In short, what Jesus is saying is this, and this is where we're going to center ourselves, is that sexuality, sex, is formative in all its forms. How we think about, how we view the opposite sex, how we view our own sexuality, it shapes us. And that's what Jesus is getting at. And that's why he starts with, "Let me warn you about what goes on in your mind." Lust, the word that Jesus uses in verse 28, is the Greek word epithumeo. And it means something of the mind. And what it deals with is the desires of the mind. Its truest definition is a longing for, a desire, a pursuit of something in your mind. To lust is to capture a thought and dwell on it. Notice how he uses the word, I think that in our English translations, to look on someone lustfully. It's not finding someone attractive. It's not finding somebody pretty or somebody handsome. It is the dwelling thought that leads a certain way. Now, epithumeo in the Greek can be used positively to dwell on the Lord. But here, Jesus takes the negative, speaking of dwelling and taking an image or a thought of something or someone that's not yours and using that image to your own gain. Epithumeo. This word in the Old Testament Septuagint, which is written in Greek, this word epithumeo appears in the 10 Commandments. But it doesn't appear in thou shalt not commit adultery. It appears in number 10 of the 10 Commandments, thou shalt not covet. It's that same idea, right? That really brings that word alive, right? Where God says, don't covet your neighbor's wife, your neighbor's house, your neighbor's property. Hebrew scholar Carmen Imes defines this word lust here, epithemeo, as this, as craving that leads to action, or a wrongful desire that is the root that leads to other sin. In other words, sex and how we view other people is formative. That's what Jesus is getting at. Yes, lust and adultery are two different things, but they are on the same plane because it is breaking what humans have been made for. Lust is beholding something in your mind that is not yours, that if given enough time will lead to action. Lust is a form of entitlement. Modern science connects this for us with what is now being called in our, you guys have probably, and you've heard me talk about, and I know you've heard in other places, our brains are plastic, right? We have neuroplasticity. What we do, what we think, the more we practice that, the more that stays in our mind, right? When thinking about pornography and studying our response, scientists now call some of what we experience with lust and with a world that is highly sexualized, they call it what's called a supernormal response. The guy that studied this more than anybody else is a researcher named Nicholas Tinbergen. And he did this through studying butterflies. This is really interesting, so hang with me on this. And Tinbergen's most famous experience, here's what he did. He tested whether overwhelming a specific stimulus in these butterflies would change their behavior. So he took male and female butterflies, and then he created cardboard female butterflies and colored them with more intense colors and designed them to move a little bit more regularly, but a little more, I guess we could say sexy to butterflies. But he gave them colors that would stand out against the other female butterflies. When male butterflies were introduced to the cardboard butterflies, they tried to mate with the fake butterflies, even when female butterflies were in the same area. The male butterflies would ignore the real butterflies in the room. They continued to prefer the intensely colored, regular moving cardboard butterflies over living, breathing females close by. That's called a supernormal response. Something that you see that opens up a brain pathway that's so great that it causes you to ignore something else. Now, but here's the scary part. Just like the butterflies, humans, if something artificial overwhelms our brains consistently, our expectations change. That's been proven over and again. It isn't just that our brains prefer supernormal stimuli. This is how drug addiction works, right? It releases endorphins into your brain in a supernormal response, and so you've got to go back and get more and more and more, right? This is all the same stuff. But what happens with a supernormal stimulus is that our brains change to expect it, and the old stimulus, known as real life, suddenly seems less attractive by comparison. That's the scary part. You know this. If you've ever watched an action movie from your childhood after, 20 years, and it had good special effects in the 90s, or in the 80s, or even now in the early 2000s, and you go back and you watch that movie and you go, what? That's awful. What happened to that movie? You have had a supernormal response, right? E.T. in the bike flying scene in E.T. doesn't hold up against modern Marvel movies, right? But when I was in the 80s and the bike flew, I was like, that's really cool. Now you're like, that looks awful. That's a supernormal response. Now, I bring that up for this reason. This is why lust in the mind, dwelling on something, combined with an overly sexualized world, gives us the disastrous results we have in modern America. It takes our brain's natural and God-given stimuli, our desire for intimacy, our desire for connection, our desire to be longed for, and for ourselves to be desirable in our relationships. All those things are good. And what it gives us is quantity. It gives us an exaggerated, supernormal response. That's what our world is giving us. So that the only thing that we can think is that our very normal thoughts have been overridden and warped. And like butterflies, what we perceive as exciting is now is not natural. It's fake. And that makes real intimacy seem so less interesting by comparison. I want you to know this. When Jesus speaks these words, he's not being a spoil sport. He's giving us the gift of deep wisdom, equating lust and what we do in here with adultery. He's giving us the deep wisdom that you have been created by God to have desires. Desires are not the problem. Desires are not bad. They are good, but our desires can be twisted. They're twisted in a world that we live in. In the world today, porn websites now receive more monthly traffic in our world than Netflix, Amazon, and Twitter combined. Did you hear that? Recently, a morality survey was given to young people, and people now rank the problem of not recycling as more immoral than they do viewing pornography. Now, you should recycle. I'm for that. But isn't that an interesting twist? Where we have become so used to the false images and to lust in our world that we believe in that lie. See, our world, when it comes to desire, gives us this lie. And the lie says this. It says desire plus consent is where you'll get intimacy. And what I mean by consent is this, is that image. A few clicks on a web browser. Consent on Tinder or hookup culture, whatever it is, we have now been given this lie that desire plus, if it's okay with everybody else or even in the privacy of your own home, then you can receive intimacy. And anybody who's ever dabbled in that, struggled with that, been tempted by that, knows how much of a lie that is. But the vision God gives us, Jesus is telling us this. He's saying, no, let's flip that. Desire plus the very heart of God. Your desire connected with the heart of God, that other person has value. It is not right for me to take another person's image in my mind and do what I want with it, because that person was not made for that. That person, their body is made to honor God. And when my heart is connected to the heart of God, I don't see people as things to be used. I see people as things to partner with, to value them so we can value God together. That's what Jesus is getting at. Desire plus the heart of God is where we find intimacy, the thing we all long for. So let's make this very practical. Again, this isn't just a talk to throw out there and say we solved it. This is a starter, right? This isn't things, well, Jake talked about sex back in 2025. You remember that? Right? That's not how this goes. But I want us to think about, how does it look to be formed, because sex is formative. How can we live according to the way of Jesus where our sexuality is being formed in the way of Jesus as well? I'll offer three things very quickly. And number one is this. Is that formation in the way of Jesus, sexual formation in the way of Jesus, is first and foremost inside out. The primary way we deal with lust, which we struggle with. I've struggled with lust as a sin in my life since I was 12 years old. And I know I'm not alone in that. I'm not afraid to say that in this room because I know that I'm not alone in that. But the primary way we often deal with lust is trying to deal with it out there. But Jesus here is teaching, and this is why he uses hyperbole about cutting off your right arm or gouging out your right eye, is he's teaching us that the issue with lust is in here. This is not to say that boundaries and wisdom are not important. They are. But boundaries are not primary to transformation. Your heart is. Secondary is boundaries. Outside in transformation. What I mean by that is gritting your teeth and just trying harder, saying, I won't ever do that again. I won't ask for a show of hands, but how many of us, not dealing with sexual sin, but any sin, how many times have you ever said to God, God, that's the last time I'll do that? Right? I'm going to grit my teeth and I'll never do that again. When I was a teenager, I'd say that about 5 times a day about the same sin. Right? It's the last time I talked back to my mom. Well, she just gave me another opportunity. I'm going to do it again, right? Outside in transformation, gritting our teeth will only get you to try harder and fail more often. And then the cycle will start over. But when we get to the heart, when we get to the inside, when it comes to lust, when you start asking questions, what's my motivation? What's my wounds? What's going on? What's the agreements I've made in my life with evil or with myself to make sure I feel good? It's that inside out stuff, the heart work, spending time with God, spending time in honest conversation with another brother or sister in accountability. It's that inward work where we don't focus on doing, we focus on becoming. And things change. Allowing God to shape us in here, and then it moves outward into the world. And that's what Jesus is getting at. He's telling us to pluck out your eye because he's really saying, this is an inward thing. You can't help what you see, but you can change who you are in the kingdom of God. Is that not good news? That's why we're here today, right, church? We're here because we believe we can change. And the second thing I think we're being taught here to be formed in, sexual formation in the way of Jesus, has to do with our desire, not attire. Now, I'm going to pick on us for a second here, and I may get in trouble for this, but I think I've got really good biblical reasons to say what I'm about to say. In Jesus' time, the leaders and teachers of the law believed that the key to eliminating lust was to avoid all contact with the opposite sex. They assumed that the opposite sex was the primary problem, right? I see them, they're making me lust because of the way they're dressed. Unfortunately, not much has changed in 2,000 years of church history. We still often view that. Does modesty matter? Sure. But most of the modesty teachings in the New Testament aren't about whether you're covered up. They're that you're dressing too expensively and you're making the poor feel bad, if you actually look at the context. That's another sermon for another day. Modesty does matter, but again, here we get things out of order. Jesus rejects the idea that another person, the object of your desire, is the problem. And he puts responsibility back on the person who is taking advantage of somebody in their mind. Too often I've heard church leaders get up and say, our women need to dress differently to help protect the men. Nope. Men, you need to change your heart. I say that strongly. Thank you. That was the women clapping there. All right. Thank you. It's not an issue of if that person is attractive to you. It's the issue of what are you doing with them in your mind. Honor them. What was that woman made for, guys? She was made to behold the image of God, not behold the image of your mind. So let us remember that. Again, is modesty important? Of course it is. I'm not throwing that out. But we have got to get our hearts in the right place. It is here that my eyes change. And third and finally, formation sexually in the way of Jesus puts love as the goal. See, I got to keep saying this. I don't want you guys leaving here saying, man, Jake is so against sex. It's not what, I'm not. God is not trying to squeeze the joy out, all the fun out of life. In fact, he's guiding us towards the good life. And I think you already know that. The good life, when it comes to sex and sexuality, is putting love as the goal. Because love in relationships and in God's intent in marriage and connected with him, love is always not about what I get, but about what I give. Biblically and correctly defined, the Christian life, the good life, is always about servanthood. It's about me putting myself under another and saying, I'm here to serve you. And when we learn to live that way in marriages, guess what? Your sex life gets a lot better. Sexuality becomes according to God's original intent. Love, guys, commits. Lust possesses. Love is patient, but lust is always entitled. Love is generous. Lust is greedy. Love serves. Lust takes. Love is constant. Lust is instant. Love lasts. Lust is fleeting. Love trusts. Lust suspects. See, what Jesus is doing here in this teaching is welcoming us into the kingdom and giving us wisdom of what a God-formed people look like. And I would propose that is when we let God do this inside-out work, our Christian sexual ethic can give hope to the world. I don't think this is just something we do in the private and say, look, we've got it all figured out. I think this is actually something that when Christian communities really live out a consistent Christian ethic of not throwing stones at the world but working on their own stuff, then we become an example for the world and it shines like a light, right? 2 weeks ago, you are salt and you are light. It's our job to display the purposes of God, and that includes sexuality. So in the 2nd century, late 2nd century, sometime between 180 and probably 200 AD, there was a great persecution in Asia Minor that broke out in the Roman Empire. And a man named Dionysius wrote a letter about the Christians who were being persecuted, and this was a long letter. But I want you to notice, I'm going to read just a section of this letter, because in this letter he describes the Christian way of life to some Romans and to some actual Roman officials who were interested. And during this persecution, Dionysius says this. This is from his letter. He says, Christians are indistinguishable from other men, either by nationality, language, or customs. They do not inhabit separate cities of their own, or speak a strange dialect, or follow some outlandish way of life. Their teaching is not based upon reveries, inspired by the curiosity of men. Unlike some other people, they champion no purely human doctrine. With regard to dress, food, and manner of life in general, they follow the customs of whatever city they happen to be living in, whether it is Greek or foreign. And yet there is something extraordinary about their lives. They live in their own countries as though they were only passing through. They play their full role as citizens, but labor under all the disabilities of aliens. Any country can be their homeland, but for them, their homeland, wherever it may be, is a foreign country. Like others, they marry and have children, but they do not expose them. They share their meals, but never share their wives. They live in the flesh, but they are not governed by the desires of their flesh. They pass their days upon earth, but they are the citizens of heaven. And the letter goes on and on. And I read that this morning because I am so inspired by an early church that one of the standard things that the world was noticing was their sexual ethic. They were different. They didn't share their wives. They didn't live like Romans. They had value in each other. And as I close, I want you to know this. Really quick, 2 things. I don't know what captured your heart this morning. I hope my prayer this week has been that just one thing you'd go, man, I want to focus on that. But I want to close with this. I want you to know that God can handle your sexual failures. You know that. He can handle them. There's a passage I love in Ephesians 5. It says this in Ephesians 5, 12 through 14. It said, it is shameful even to mention what is the disobedient do in secret. I think Paul there, that sounds like he's being harsh. I think what he's doing is kind of saying, yes, we understand there's a lot of sexual sin in the world. He's just being honest. But look at what he says. Here's the good news. He says, but everything exposed by the light becomes visible, and everything that is illuminated becomes a light. This is why it said, wake up, sleeper, rise from the dead, and Christ will shine on you. Now, what you just heard is incredibly good news. It is that God can handle my inward failures, even my sexual sin. And in fact, the good news here is that when I give him those things, when I'm honest about those things, guess what happens? A light shines on them, and they no longer are dark, but become what? They become a light. This is called redemption. This is called God's ability to transform. This is God working out good for those that love him. That when we allow God to handle our sexual failures, God goes, I'm not only going to clean you up, I'm going to use you. I'm going to make you light. I'm going to turn you around. So I would encourage you this week, or just as we close this morning, just with this simple challenge. See what happens when you invite Jesus into every part of your life. You are not alone today if you're struggling with something. If you struggle with lust, if you struggle with temptation, if you struggle with thoughts, if you struggle with this, and you go, man, I'm way too old to be dealing with this, or I'm way too young to be dealing with this, or I can't stay off the internet, or I can't keep from getting on TikTok or Instagram, or I can't stop looking at this website, or whatever it is. You are not alone. God can handle your failures. And you're not alone, not only because God is here, but you're not alone because all of us struggle. And we all fall on the mercy of God. And may we continue to do so. Let there be no shame, and let there be no shadow, because we're allowing the light of Jesus to shine on every part of our life. We're going to have some prayer warriors up. I know that today, after a topic like this, anytime I've ever preached on sex, you see that look in people's eyes. People are like, I am not getting out of my chair. Oh. You may have something else going on in your life, and we have space for that. Okay? So if you're one of those people who's sitting there and you're watching people get up and move and thinking, well, they must have a lot of sexual sin in their life. Shame on you. Stop that. All right? Let's not do that. Is not our attitude. And that's not who we are. We are Grace Crossing, a place where grace crosses with our life, right? And so this is a place of grace. This is a place where we pray over whatever we need to pray over, because we are all following and sometimes stumbling behind Jesus. And he is so good to us. He keeps picking us up and walking us closer to him. And that's beautiful. Let's stand together and let's worship the Lord.